And we're live.
On Facebook?
Going. We just went live on Facebook.
Okay,
Are you not seeing it?
okay, I see it. Okay, I see you now. On Facebook?
Okay.
We gotta work on muting in the beginning. All right, James? All right. Let me know when you're ready. You count me in.
All right, and we're due in 3, 2, 1.
Heavenly Father, Lord God, we thank you so much for this day. We are grateful to you for this opportunity to have a conversation. And so I pray and ask that you be in the midst of this conversation, that you bless it, that you enrich, enlighten, encourage us. It's in Jesus' name I pray this. Amen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What's the Message? I am your host, Claudia Allen, and I am back. I apologize. I have been gone for 2 whole weeks, but I am back with my co-host, Carmela Monk Crawford. Carmela, how you doing? I'm sorry. You can be mad at me.
You said, no, I'm not mad at you. I'm grateful that you are back, one, because we missed you, and I'm grateful that you're doing better. How you feeling?
I'm feeling a little bit better, man. You know, I was battling the COVID. I got the Rona. I got the vid, whatever you want to call it. I caught it, and you know, I'm still battling this lingering cough. This cough does not want to leave my body, but the rest of it is gone. The rest of it's gone. It's just a cough. So I'm feeling good.
I have never seen anybody battle the COVID like Claudia. Okay, first of all, Claudia is on this social media saying tonight, Claudia Allen, and this afternoon she's doing this. That is not how you do it, you know. But apparently it is, because you survived.
We survived, man. We survived. And I mean, listen, I can't take off with COVID. This is why, you know, I told somebody, I said, listen, I had to tell COVID was done. All right. I took a week for COVID. I gave COVID a week. Then I told COVID, all right, COVID, I got things to do. I can't keep messing with you. So I had to just come back because there's just so much going on in the world right now. I mean, we're not even going to touch on this today, but you know, President Biden just finished 100 days. We got a State of the Union recently with 2 women seated behind him. That was such a powerful image. How did you feel when you saw that, Carmela?
Well, you know, they had the meeting of them on loop on CNN. It just comes up and they're like, boom, boom, boom. I was like, y'all just go ahead and do the bump. Let's do this. This is all right. It was just great to see them there, and the responses that they were making. It's a different world. What can you say? I don't have words for it.
Yeah, but you know, not only is it a different world in that regard, it is also a different world regarding that of police reform and police brutality. Because I don't know about you, but I was shocked and shooketh when we got a verdict for Derek Chauvin on all 3 counts.
Amazing.
Attorney Carmela Monk Crawford, like how likely is it that we've ever gotten a verdict for an officer on all 3 counts?
Funny, you should ask me that. My understanding is that you get a conviction like that in 2% of the cases. So think of all the cases that do not come into court. Think of all the cases where people don't die, but a 2% conviction rate of an officer is extremely low. And then you got all 3 counts. What is worse than all of that is the fact that it was close, that people wondered, that we were suspenseful. Until the last moment when you got 9.5 minutes of damning evidence.
Yeah.
And we worried that the jury would not return a conviction.
Yeah.
And that is the indication of how bad things are and how far we have come. And so now we await sentencing. And I'm not satisfied with just the conviction. I would like to see an appropriate sentence handed down, and I would like to see that not only, I want to see the police community say, yes, he should serve the time.
Yeah.
It's not enough for the conviction, but yes, serve the time. And so this, one thing we said last week is this is not us gloating. This is not us happy about someone's downfall. This is about, a process of justice and accountability that we expected in no less other places, but definitely for this man, George Floyd. I wanted to talk about that today, so I'm glad you asked me that. But
no, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that we've got a coalition of guests that are going to help us make sense of this even more. And I am so excited to introduce them. So many of you know we have had this guest on in the past, but she is none other than the Reverend Dr. Gayle Fisher Stewart. She is the interim pastor of the St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. She also spent 20 years with the Metropolitan Police Department. She is an activist and she is committed to making sure that Black Lives Matter by eliminating racist systems that deny the humanity of Black people. And she does this as a chaplain for the Tacoma Park Police Department. And in her writings, she's published a book called Preaching Black Lives Matter. And she's got another one that is soon to come. I'm also excited to welcome the Reverend Dr. Matt Braddock to the podcast this morning. I met him in the Sojourners Racialized Policing Certificate, and he is the senior minister at Christ Congregational Church in Silver Spring, Maryland. As a pastor, teacher, and social activist, Reverend Braddock invites people to identify the intersections of faith and life as they seek ways to enact their common wisdom and mission. Reverend Braddock's book, The Space Between: Spiritual Activism in an Age of Fear, explores the intersections of faith and public activism. He's also an adjunct professor at Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. We also have Overseer Jay Offer. He is the founding pastor of Harvest Crusade Ministries in Glen Burnie, Maryland. And through his ministry, he leads his congregation and community in the pursuit of deeper relationship in Christ and is a tenacious voice for sound, compassionate public policy through advocacy and as a published editorialist. And I'm also excited to welcome back my friend, my brother, Pastor Garrison Hayes, who is a Atlanta, Georgia native, currently living in Alexandria, Virginia with his wife, Simone Marshall Hayes. Derek Garrison serves as the pastor for generational ministries at Community Praise Seventh-day Adventist Church. And Garrison holds an undergraduate degree in film production, and he completed a Master of Divinity from the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary in 2018. He is informed by the gospel of Jesus Christ and has an abiding commitment to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in education, church, and society. In other words, I have a stacked panel for you this morning. Yes. Okay? I brought you the best of the best from the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area. And these people are actually coming together to create a kind of coalition of leaders and ministers that are committing to do the work of police reform in the DMV area. And I am so excited to talk with them about it. And Reverend Gayle really was one of the first to, or at least she made a post a few weeks ago. And so I would really love to bring Reverend Gayle in. Reverend Gayle, it's always great to have you back. It's always great to talk to you. What were you thinking when you made your post? How were you feeling? Tell us, what did you post? What were you talking about?
Yeah, what was I thinking when I made that post? In fact, I was responding to a post from my brother Jay. You know how things happen and we always say, we need to do something, we need. And so I posted back, I said, Jay, we are the we. What we gonna do? You know? And so we were going back and forth, and So what is it that we can really do to get the faith community not on the periphery of this issue, but in the center of this issue? Because what we're really talking about is how God's people are being treated.
Yes.
And when God's people are not being treated right, that is an offense toward God. And it seems like the people of God ought to have not only a place at the table, we ought to bring the table and the chairs. And so in thinking about that, we're going back and forth. I said, oh, we're okay. There's Claudia. Let's get Claudia in here because Claudia is out there and she can get a message anywhere. And so then Claudia brought in Matt and Garrison. And so this is kind of like the nucleus to get people of faith to really think about where we are in this issue and what we can do. Because if you think about it, if we brought together just all of the Christian churches, we're not even talking about the other houses of faith. If we just brought together the Christian churches to really focus on this issue, we could actually do something. And I think that's what Jesus would want us to do, to actually do something, even though it might actually get us up on the cross. But Father Daniel Berrigan, who was an activist during the 60s, says, if you're going to follow Jesus, get used to looking good on wood. Okay.
My Lord.
Get used to looking good on wood. Not only are you gonna carry the cross, sometimes your folks might even put you up on it. Yeah. And so I think as we're looking at this, we are all Easter people, right? We are in Eastertide, the 50 days of Easter. But something that we need to do in looking at this particular issue is that we need to stay at the foot of the cross a little bit. We don't like to stay at the foot of the cross. We want to get to Easter Sunday and say hallelujah. But we need to stay at the foot of the cross because if you think about it, Darnella Frazier and the other folks who watched and recorded the murder of George Floyd, yeah, they were the witnesses at the foot of the cross of that crucifixion. And had they not been there, we would not have a guilty verdict.
Mercy.
So how are we going to be witnesses at the foot of this cross called American policing so that we can actually change it? And Garrison is right. You can't reform something that is so broken. Sometimes you just got to discard that and start all over.
Well, to that, Reverend Gayle, I want to bring the rest of our witnesses on. And Garrison, I'm going to come directly to you. Well, Pastor Hayes, I'm gonna be formal today with everybody. Pastor Hayes, what do you mean when you say an inherently broken system cannot be reformed?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having us all on here for this important conversation. It's hard for me to imagine reforming something that was specifically designed to violate the humanity of image bearers. I mean, to violate people, specifically here in America. A lot of police officers, we had this conversation on. We can think through the ideals of policing, what it is to represent and how police officers are to engage with their communities. But when we look at the history of policing, we see a direct connection between the slave patrol of the 1800s, 1700s, and 1800s, and what we now understand as policing today. And that genesis, that initial trajectory, has set American policing particularly on a pathway to destruction. It is specifically destroying the lives of people of color. To be more specific, destroying the lives of Black people. And it's hard for me. So I think there are two things that surface inside of me, Claudia. The first thing is this realization that this is a system that is rotten at its core. We have to say that. We have to name it. We have to be honest about that. And at the same time, are we going to do away with policing? And so probably not. The reality is probably not. And so we can't afford to disengage. We have to both acknowledge and be willing to engage. And that is a very difficult space to hold and to exist in. And so it's very hard for me to think through reform without first acknowledging that we need to probably dismantle and reform. And at the same time, recognizing that from a pragmatic perspective, we need to engage a little bit more.
Overseer Jay, Reverend Braddock, can you guys come in? Can you guys weigh in before I give a little bit of a pushback? What are you guys' thoughts?
I think that what has been said so far is absolutely correct. You know, the system was designed intrinsically, its whole outcomes are not working for specific people, i.e. not working for the Black community, not working for the Hispanic community, not working for people who don't fit into a certain mold. And you got to break some eggs to make mayonnaise. I'm not that comes to mind. I'm sorry I didn't come up with that great quote that my sister Gayle used, but you do have to know how to grab the process and arrest what is wrong with it, while also laying the groundwork for the new direction that it should go in. People get upset about when they see people talking about defunding the police and reimagining the police. But the truth of the matter is, when I first heard Reverend Stewart say that her thought processes when we were talking, she was like, she takes the abolitionist stance, but somebody has to take the abolitionist stance, because we need to figure out where we need to start from to find that common ground. And I'm afraid that if we start from the place where we're giving in too much to the fact that the system is too difficult to change, it is too to truly reimagine what we're going to do, is when we get to compromise point, we're not going to be where we really need to be. And I celebrate America, from this standpoint. We can do it. We can do anything that we want to do. Now I'll give you a quote. Benjamin Disraeli says, "Nothing can resist a human will that stakes its very existence on its stand that this is and always will be a significant problem in our community. Until we change it, we won't get people to the table." We talk about coming to the table, but there's empty seats. People need to be at the table to affect this change. And the only change that is going to last is change that we can all take ownership of. And how can we take ownership of it if we have no part in shaping that future?
That's really great. Reverend Braddock?
Yeah, so, and it does have that feeling more and more that modern day policing is punitive and also taking the law into its own hands in a way that's exterminating lives, Black lives in particular. And the more this goes on, there's this feeling that the police are here to support like a state-sanctioned genocide of Black folk and people of color. And so I don't know how you reform or fix something like that. I feel like sometimes structurally we're spending so much time trying to bolster weaknesses instead of looking for the strengths that modern cops are really good at and letting them do that stuff. And you know, we ask so much of modern day police forces that they're not equipped to handle. We had a case here in Silver Spring a few years ago where one of the neighbors here of my church, living close by in one of the neighborhoods, out walking at night, Robert White Jr., known as a really gentle soul and a great neighbor around, in the neighborhoods here, wouldn't comply with a police officer who asked him to stop, was aggravated and obviously in some kind of mental health distress, whether that was an acute mental health crisis or something ongoing. This police officer was so unequipped to deal with the mental health crisis Robert White Jr. was in at that moment, ended up shooting and killing him. And the cop ended up being acquitted after a number of investigations. And I'd like to think, well, I wouldn't like to think this. What I hear a lot of times is, well, that it's the bad apple cop narrative that we keep hearing. You know, there's a few bad apples in the force, and if we just pull out the bad apples out of the bucket, everything will be good. And we're failing to see that there's this deeply ingrained systemic problem of what we're asking police to do, what they're unequipped to do, and instead helping them do the pieces they're really good at, and finding other ways to deal with mental health crises, with routine traffic stops, with all these other things that other people could be doing better.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm gonna play devil's advocate today.
Push it.
Like my friend and co-host often says, she's buffering. And so I like what you said just now, Reverend Braddock, because I'm buffering, because while I agree with you and agree with what everyone has been saying about abolition, listen, if somebody breaks into this here apartment, I'm not calling Garrison. Garrison is a good hour away from me. He's not going to get here in time. I don't have time to text Simone and be like, can I borrow your husband real quick? Because somebody just broke into my house. I'm going to call the cops. So who, I say that jokingly to say, who do we call when there is a break-in, or when we're having, experiencing domestic violence, or, when we're in danger, when we're experiencing some kind of public safety concern? Who do we call if we abolish the police, if we completely defund the police? Who deals with these incidences then?
We're not saying abolish the police. There will always be a need for the police, because there is always folks who won't play by the rules. What we are saying is that the American system of policing, its roots are rotten. And so what we need to do is abolish the current system and reform it to what it is needed. I mean, if we look at it, we've been talking about reform for the last almost 90 years. Almost 100 years, right? With O.W. Wilson and August Vollmer, right? They were considered the fathers of modern American policing. So we've been reforming for almost 100 years. And initially it was reforming because the police were just inept. So they had to become professionalized. Later on, we were reforming in the 60s because specifically the police had negative interactions and relationships with communities of color. So since the 60s, we've been trying to fix that relationship. First, we brought on more Black officers, and then we brought on Korean officers, and then we brought on LGBTQIA officers. We brought on women, saying if we just bring them all on, then policing will change. But what we don't recognize is that if we even go back to the 20s and 30s and come up to the 70s, all of those police officers are either retired or dead, right? They're retired or dead. We can even go into the 80s. So where are the officers who are on the street now learning how to disrespect Black bodies? That's where the systemic comes in, because just as when we have Thanksgiving dinner, we talk about great-great-great-great-grandma, and we know how to set a proper table because of somebody who's been dead over 100 years, those values and traditions have been passed down, and they have been taking root so that they then infect the current officers. The current officers now are just as much victims of the system of policing as those who lie dead in our streets. And as we were waiting for the verdict to come down in the Floyd case, we still had police officers responding to calls for service, not knowing the reception they would receive. And so when we talk about this table, the one group that's not being talked to are the police officers. Everybody's making decisions for them. Chiefs of police, commanders, heads of law enforcement organizations, they're all making decisions without talking to the people on the street to ask, Where did you learn? How did you learn? How do you feel? And until we bring them to the table, you can have all the reforms, you can have all the laws. It will not take hold because you have to have the people involved to have some investment in the change. And we're leaving them totally out of the conversation.
Wow. Wow. You know, that's one thing, that's a place that I didn't think we were going to go today. And, you know, okay, good on you for bringing it there. Having served in the police force for 20 years, Reverend Gayle, you know, that's, I have to say, thank you for bringing that perspective and that wrinkle, because in my heart, I'm not trying to feel what the police officers are feeling. That's probably a mistake. That's a mistake for all of these conversations to figure out what's happening with them. But I think you are putting your finger on a part of what's wrong here. And I think my question to all of you are, what are some of the assumptions in modern policing that keep us coming back to this conversation? You know, I was thinking to myself, you know, you have that broken glass theory, right? You know, get on something fast and hard and make sure that, you know, we get something early on, make sure that you're there in minority communities, right? What are some of the assumptions that keep us coming back this way, however erroneously?
I think that one of the things that is happening that we just found out from Pastor Stewart was that, you know, we had this big question mark. We don't know what is going on in the minds of these officers. But when we look at the Derek Chauvin trial, one of the keys, everybody talks about Dr. Tobin's testimony, and they talk about the MMA person who was observing. But we lose a little bit in the translation when we don't talk about the fact that the police chief testified and fellow police officers testified. And this is a very different dynamic. It's very true about the blue wall, blue line, whatever you want to call it. It's like cops just are trained and don't even realize. And I say we, because I think I failed to tell you that I retired with 27 years with Maryland Natural Resources Police. And so we have a culture that, you know, we stick together because there's a us versus them. And the conversations that are necessary to happen in the community aren't happening because the community has that perception just as well. It's us versus them. And what they don't realize and understand is that there are officers who can stand up and be Serpico. We all know about Serpico and how he was ostracized because he spoke up about corruption in the police department. And the other thing is we need to understand when the community says corruption and a person on the inside says corruption, do they mean the same thing? They're coming from different perspectives, but there are allies within the police department that are seeking change and seeking a way to end these types of things. And I believe Matt, I don't know if he's ever been a cop before or not, but he's absolutely correct in that police are being asked to do things more and more every day that they are not trained to do. Recently here in Anne Arundel County, we had an incident where a gentleman, he was an older gentleman, and I don't call him elderly because he's about my age. But anyway, he was at a place where he was called. They were concerned that he was suicidal. Police officers responded. He ended up ultimately losing his life. But people ask questions, well, did they send a mental health professional or anything? One of the officers that was there was trained in that. But the situation itself, as I found out some of the details, it didn't lend to a peaceful resolution. It was one of those situations where officers had to make a decision with the facts that they were quickly presented with immediately. And the same thing that we talk about with Michaela's case, you know, when we look at those things. And so there needs to be understanding of the culture. There needs to be understanding that cops get up in the morning and they want to do a good job. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know, how can I screw up somebody's life today? How can I mess up my entire life? How can I put my entire house and all of the savings that I have for my children's future? How can I jeopardize all of that today? And so that's something that we have to really stop and take a look at. And
But
take
Pastor
stock.
Jay, yet they do though. Yet it happens more than we want it to happen. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what would life be like if we didn't have the us versus them? Has anybody ever seen it work where there's a community and the police move and work in the community and it's not that us versus them? Can you have an effective police force if you don't have us versus them?
It has to start at the top. And we were talking about this before. Everybody's dialogue is focusing on the officers that are on the job. When I was a commander, at any given time, I had 40, 45 sworn officers. One of my assignments, I was responsible for over 1,000 volunteers that were handling loaded firearms with the public. And I would go home and I would say, Lord, just cover and keep every one of them, because one of them could make a mistake at any time. But what was the key to making sure that safety rules were followed and that we had the highest level of professionalism in whatever command Jay Offer was responsible for? It was the leadership. It was me. And sometimes it wasn't received well, that I have to remind people of rudimentary operations and stuff. But it was my job to ensure that all of these people could stand fast and do a good job with what they had. And so in doing a good job with what they had, I created a culture where they could be the best. They were free to be the best. They were encouraged to be the best. And when they were the best, I didn't come at them when they made a mistake. There was such a thing as a teachable moment. But when you went out, and I know I've told you exactly what you're supposed to do, and you did exactly opposite of what you were supposed to do, then that's my responsibility again to stand up and say, we need to work on corrective behaviors.
Did you fire him?
Can I push back for a moment?
I'm just wondering.
Let me
answer her question real
quick. Okay.
There was one officer in my command that a sergeant came to me and he wasn't handling the personnel issues properly. And I had to train him on how to do that. But I trained him knowing that if these tactics didn't work to help turn around the behaviors in this officer, then he was going to be fired. And he was very close to being fired. The only thing that saved him probably from being fired was the fact that I got a new assignment and was gone somewhere. And so a new commander came in. And that's why I put a lot of responsibility on the chief. I put a lot of responsibility on the senior staff. I put a lot of responsibility on the commanders. They're the ones that are there that see day to day. But let me be full disclosure. There are some people that are wearing badges today that have absolutely no business wearing a badge, period.
And we can see that. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Reverend Gayle, I interrupted you.
I'm going to push back a little bit, and I'm going to answer your question, because it can work, and it was beginning to work during the 90s and early 2000s with community policing. Okay, but community policing takes too much effort. It takes too much effort because you actually give patrol officers an area of responsibility where they are held accountable for knowing who's in the community, to working with the community. But see, there's a problem. Policing needs to have something called evaluation. Mm-hmm. We can't evaluate the absence of crime. How we evaluate is how fast you get to a call for service and how many people you lock up. So it was a disconnect. We want you to go out there and take time and get to know, but we haven't heard you on the radio. How many, you didn't have an arrest, you didn't write any tickets. Well, I didn't need to write tickets because I know the people and I just told them to move their car. Okay. Wow. So that takes a different mindset that policing is not used to, because it's built on bodies going into the system. The other thing is that as we look at the police chief testifying and other officers coming, the murder of George Floyd was so heinous that if you didn't cross that blue line, you would be seen as heartless. The murder of George Floyd gave the police permission to say what they've needed to say all along. Because I listened to all the police chiefs and the pundits on, CNN, and I'm going, well, where were you 20 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
You were silent on all of this. And now you're saying, oh, yes, we need to reform. And oh, yes, the culture needs to be changed. That's because they were given permission.
Mm-hmm.
Had it not been for George Floyd, you would not have heard a peep out of any of them other than, the police are doing the job they're called to do, and we need to be with them. And so we have to look at all of that because it is changing, because we know that it didn't change that much, because while we were waiting for that verdict, Ma'Khia Bryant, after that, Andrew Brown.
Can I ask you something really quick? And Claudia, I'm sorry to jump in here because there's two burning questions that I have. And one thing I would love to ask the whole panel about this is, you've got the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that's coming through, right? Mm-hmm. And what's on the table? Ban chokeholds, ban no-knock warrants, right? Create a duty to intervene. So if you're a police officer on the scene and somebody's doing something that is excessive, you can jump in, right? Create a public registry. So like what Pastor Jay says, as he moved to a different command, at least somebody's watching the guy that he left, right? And so in qualified immunity, which I think is very interesting. My question to you is, it seems like the best that we can do is legislate the behavior, because we are not, as many training manuals as you have written, Reverend Gayle, as many times as we have cultural competency, you had the mental health expert on the scene, Pastor Jay, we cannot depend on transforming the individual. Mm-hmm. Is there something else that you would add to this list that could be effective?
Well, I'll jump in here and say that I don't know, how, whether or not these things will work, because I don't think we've gotten enough data, enough departments actually kind of implementing these measures. I think that they would definitely improve things. But there's a scholar, his name is Philip Atiba Goff. He studies policing, and he talks a great deal about how the conditions that police officers have to work in are essentially set up, for all intents and purposes, for them to make bad decisions. They're tired, working long hours, encountering people who they've been trained to believe are threats. I mean, if you put anyone in those similar conditions, they are probably going to make, in a snap decision, the wrong decision. They will likely default to biases and closely held beliefs about those individuals that are often wrong. And so even if we ended qualified, even if we ended qualified immunity, which I think is very, very important, and banned chokeholds and didn't allow cops to shoot people who were running away or vehicles driving away, that kind of thing. Even if we did all of the things that are in the 8 that can't wait, we would still likely have officers who are having to make decisions in the middle of the night, who are having to do things under the conditions that are difficult for any human being to make good decisions in. And this is really what kind of comes to my point. I think everyone has kind of introduced a level of empathy for the police that I think is great and necessary. And the thing that I've kind of struggled with is that we are indeed asking police officers to do a job, as Matt and Jay and Reverend Dr. Gayle have mentioned, are just, they're not necessarily qualified to do. Particularly, I want us to really focus on the fact that policing is an inherently reactionary job. I mean, we should really be going further upstream on a lot of these issues. I'm so thankful for Claudia's question some time ago about, hey, someone breaks into my house and Garrison, are you going to come help? I would love to help, but I will be reacting to a crime that has already been committed, something that's already happened. And while there will absolutely always be people who don't want to follow the rules, there are always going to be some small, very, very small number of people who are just going to break the law. The reality is that we create conditions where the only way to survive in this country is to do something illegal. The only way to make it day to day is for you to start doing drugs. That's just the only way to cope, because our healthcare system is it's awful. Or we've put people in communities where there are no resources. And so my kind of appeal here is that, we can't ask the police to continue to do jobs that should be solved way further upstream. And I think that's a really important thing for us to, you asked this question, Carmela, about the assumptions. I think we assume that police officers are solutions to problems that other legislation is a solution to. Police officers are not the solution to stopping crime. I'm sorry to inform us, but we have to go way further upstream.
I once heard Emmanuel Cleaver, the congressman from Missouri. He was saying something I thought was so funny. He said, people quote that quote that said, the love of money is the root of all evil. And he said, I don't know if the love of money is the root of all evil, but I know brokenness is very influential in what's going on. And I'm here to your point, Garrison Hayes. I think that we do have to go upstream. Can I ask one last question, Claudia? I know you're sitting there. She's ready to go. I can tell. Go ahead, Claudia. Go ahead.
I guess the thing that was coming to my mind while Garrison was talking as well is just to kind of distill it, because I think it's very fascinating, is that the answer to our crime is actually putting our money and resources to other issues, right? So it is increasing the minimum wage. It is improving our education system. It's improving our healthcare system. It's not exclusively a cultural training course for police officers, because regardless of the cultural training course, they're still going to have to answer your 3 a.m. call. And so at what point then do we address what caused your unemployed husband or your bipolar son or your whatever to be doing whatever's happening at 3 o'clock in the morning that would cause you to call the police, right? And then who are the entities, whether that is, and not to say that these systems aren't problematic either, but child protective services, social workers, there are a variety of public service entities within our communities that we don't, as a community, have the same number for, like we do the police, And so I think that's a really great and interesting point. And as I even say that, every other thing in this country has a regular 10-digit number. The police, that's the only 3-digit number, right? That's 911. Everybody knows who to call, or what the number is we need to call the police. But what if, maybe the social workers or mental health workers or some of these other community servants had numbers that were much more easy to remember? That's all I wanted to just kind of throw in there. Go ahead.
But see, you just answered the question on defunding the police.
Yeah.
What you said is defunding the police. It's looking at what entities should be handling that and take away those tasks from the police with the requisite money and making sure that those organizations, those entities are ready to respond also on a 24/7 basis. Right? You can't be told, given the situation you said, your bipolar son, we'll be there in 2 days. That's not going to work. So what you just did is the classic answer to when people ask, what do you mean by defunding the police? Making sure the other agencies
I think we also need to so we can reallocate resources. We can go to the top. We can provide training. We can make certain police tactics illegal, like Carmela was pointing out in the George Floyd Act. It's not going to keep people from doing those things. Well, I think one of the things, in addition to all of that we do as faith leaders and in houses of worship, is start to re-narrate what it means to be a cop. Yeah. And for so long, this question came about, what are the assumptions in modern policing that are keeping us from reform? And I really think part of it is this narrative, this archetype of police as warriors. Yeah. And we expect that of them, and we've militarized them to be able to form that function. I don't want a police officer to come to my house when someone's breaking in with an armored vehicle. And I want a public servant. I want that warrior to be balanced with a servant. And I think that's one of the things that our scriptures and our faith stories and our job as faith leaders is to help do that, is to kind of start re-narrating these roles and thinking about how we form these partnerships like Reverend Gayle was talking about, so that they're in on this conversation and the police are part of reframing and re-narrating what their role is in the community too.
I love what you were saying, and I was just going to ask you, and just I'm asking you by way of this and putting this to the whole panel, because I really want us to get to something. What are we going to do? That's what I want to know. What am I going to do? What that will make a difference? And I was reading the phrases that you had in your book, Pastor Matt, the contemplative action and the active contemplation. Because to me, but I would love to hear your, I want to know how you unpack that. It seems to me that faith communities are, or some of them are on the sidelines and, trying to figure out where to jump in, but can't. And I feel like it is a lot of contemplation. And I want to go beyond that. Talk to us, unpack those terms, and then let's go around. Maybe you've seen something that works that we could be involved in.
Yeah, so I think some faith traditions are definitely on the sidelines and do not want to engage in these issues at all. And I think those that want to engage sometimes default to one response over another. So some I see this especially in Christian churches, some traditions will say, well, we're just going to keep praying about this. I'm part of the United Church of Christ. We're not always so great about praying about stuff, but we're really good at putting our faith in action and putting our feet on the sidewalks. And I think that the prayer, the contemplative prayer piece and the faith and action piece need to always be together and in balance with each other. They don't have to have like equal time necessarily, but one always speaks to the other. So I think of this as a breath or a heartbeat where we're praying, we're receiving our inspiration from the Spirit, and then we're going out and practicing what we've learned and heard together in community with each other. And once we've done that for a while, we need to come back and reassess and pray and breathe and become aware and be in community and in communication with each other and refine our approaches and go back. And so we're always having this back and forth with contemplative action and active contemplation, something that I refer to as spiritual activism. It's not my term, but it's been around for a long time. But I think finding that balance is really important.
That's great.
What are we going to do?
Another thing, and that's why we're together, is that police officers go to church or synagogue or mosque. They are in our pews and they are in our pulpits. And so, if we start at that level, that they are already with us, we know who they are, to start bringing them together and to go across denominational lines. I can get to a Presbyterian church quicker than I can get to an Episcopal church, because a Presbyterian church is 2 blocks up. And so if we go disband those denominational, I can't talk to you and I can't talk to you, and we get the police officers who are sitting in our pews to come together, as opposed to going to the chief, can we talk to your officers? No, we already have them. Let's pull them together and have these conversations and get them involved in making the decisions about how to change the profession that they have a critical role in making sure it does what it's supposed to do.
Wow.
I think one of the other things that we need to understand is that the church has more power than it wants to use right now. We aren't utilizing the full scope of where we can reach. Marianne Williamson, aside from writing that great poetry, Our Greatest Fear, when she ran for president, if you looked at some of her plans, one of the biggest things that got my attention about her was trying to change our economy from a war economy to a peace economy. And some of the things that she spoke of in that were very, very true. I went and researched it. And they apply even to the situation that we're talking about. The church is probably in the most advantageous position in that we're a city upon a hill. And we are called to be that city upon the hill, and people can look up to that place. I remember being in Dodoma, Tanzania, and the presidential palace is on the top of a hill. And it was amazing to see it up there. And I looked up and I was in awe of it. And the church needs to get back to a place where the public trusts us and sees that we're using the power that we have in a constructive way. What are some of the things that we can do? We're already trying to do it, but we want to make our community safer from within. As you said, the police are reacting, but we're there. We see the young man that is going through withdrawals because he's trying to get a monkey off of his back, like the old folk used to say. You know, we know who's addicted to drugs and who needs to get into rehab. We know who is going out and doing destructive behaviors. We know who the wife beaters are. We know who the malingerers are that, you know, is like, oh, I can't work and all of this other stuff. And we can put things in place to help to turn those situations around before they become a 911 situation. We know that poverty is like we said earlier, poverty causes all kinds of problems because people will do crimes of what we call necessity. And that creates further problems. You know, if a person that is high end on the spectrum, autistic, can end up in a situation with a police officer and a police officer can shoot them. Imagine what a hungry child that's going out there trying to steal something from somebody or what have you can create as well. You know, we have lack of health care, vulnerable women. We need to take care of our women. Our church was challenged and we stood up to it, and we all have to stand up to it. And I know that there are other churches that are doing very good work with domestic violence, trying to keep women out of sex trafficking, you know, failure to protect our children from sex abuse and those types of things. Education, you know, we talk about the home and school connection, but the church is not present. So when we talk about what can we do, I'm not saying that the church is neglectful. There are places that the church is being neglectful, because I believe if you understand these concepts and refuse to implement them, if you refuse to get into the ring and take up your part of the fight, then you are neglectful. And I'm sorry to say that to some of my pastors, but you know, that's the truth. But others just don't know and aren't aware. And as you said, as you said, Gayle, you know, we have police officers in our pews. We have police officers that we're connecting with. We have police officers that are showing up at our food banks when we're distributing food during this COVID situation. We have access to law enforcement in a way that the rest of the community really doesn't have. And we have access to the community to start talking about what we can do to change the culture within our community so that we can head off some of these things that will bring us down. We're all in this together. There's a song my old lieutenant used to sing. It says, we're in the same boat, brother, you and I, rock one end, you rock the other. And if we can figure that out and start understanding that there's no one that is exempt from this. I don't care if you're white, I don't care if you're black. All of this affects every one of us.
Wait, I saw something. Go ahead, Garrison Hayes. I'm sorry, before I say something, go ahead.
Yeah, I just say quickly that there are two biblical traditions that I think are extremely important to this work. First is that of the prophets. They were able to speak very clearly and at times what felt to be pessimistically about the condition of their people. I think about Jeremiah in Lamentations, who spoke very graphically about the dirtiness of his people. And yet he could also say that great is your faithfulness, God, that your mercies are new every morning. So there's this dual prophetic voice of both pessimism, realism is really the true word, and hope. That's the first tradition, that prophetic tradition. I think we need to re-embrace that, where we are able to speak very clearly about the condition of policing today, while also holding space for hope. And the second tradition is that of Jesus Christ, who was willing to draw close, to draw near to these systems that oppressed and change them through proximity. And I think I have been inspired by just listening to Jay and Gayle as they've shared their experience as chaplains, as they shared how they've drawn closer. I think we need a movement of equipping our members, equipping Christians, people who believe that this thing needs to change, equipping them with the necessary tools to draw close and to live in community with police officers in a way that would bring about change. So those two traditions are extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
This is good, practical information. I saw just in the last 2 days, Claudia, I know I sent to you, it was the movement for Black Lives. They're on the ground in Minnesota, and they've noticed, people are fearful, people are obviously stressed, people are displaced. And what they have said is, we're making wellness checks on families in the area. Making wellness checks. Hey, do you have what you need? How are you feeling? How are you dealing with this? This is something that I think the church can do. And I saw one of our friends on Facebook the other day told a story of going to the store and seeing some kids in the parking space in the car next to her fighting and wrestling. You know how we used to do when we were kids, right? When the mom went into the store, man, they were going at it. And she and another Black woman from the other side, on the other side of the car, walked up to the car and said, "Hey, cut it out." And they just stood there and they waited for the mom to come out. And it's like, maybe what I'm hearing you all say is re-employing in areas and times when you can, the village and stepping in. She's like, if we're not stepping in, who else is going to step in? And how are they going to step in? And so she said, now, Mom, what'd you say?
No, but even to that, Carmela, in the same way that Reverend Gayle said earlier, that community policing is a lot of work.
Yes.
Being a community for the church is a lot of work.
Yeah.
It is so much easier to do a kind of ministry where I can come in once a week to my faith community, stand behind my respective pulpit, say whatever I've got to say. We sing a few songs and everybody go home. But this wellness check, me being in actual relationship, like we don't even like being in relationship with people long enough to disciple them. Like long enough to make sure that you have a real relationship with Jesus. I can't even stay with you that long, let alone a kind of intimacy that would allow me as either your Bible study leader or your pastor or your women's ministries leader or your whatever kind of leader, for you to even tell me, hey, my son is having a mental health crisis right now. But hey, I didn't, when people don't make it into church, our first assumption is that they're being lazy or they're now going to somebody else's church. We never check in to say, hey, the praise team leader got beat this morning, so she didn't want to come in. Like there's just so much that is happening in our communities, and we have lost just that power that Pastor Jay was talking about, that we have, that resides in the small groups, that resides in our ability to genuinely look out and look into one another, and then actually give and pour in the way that we see in Acts, so that people can actually be revived and restored and resourced in the ways that they need to be. That's work.
That's work. Can I ask you all something? Because just as you said, it's easy to come in on Sunday and preach and then go home, right? A lot of times when we meet, we say, "Oh, this was good,"
right?
Right? Just like when we first met, and we say, "Okay, we've talked. What are we going to do?" Okay, we're going to be with Claudia and Carmela. Yeah. We can do that. So as we're looking at doing both, and we're looking at the root causes of the need to call the police, but at the meantime, we also have to work with the police. It's a both and. Is there a way that Carmela and Claudia, with your platform, that you can begin to ask pastors, who are the police officers in your congregations? Have you talked to them? Email us, send a video of what you've done, who's there, and it will probably be out of the COVID soon enough where we can start gathering again. That after we have talked to everybody, we start pulling together the police officers who are in our congregations into an in-person meeting.
That's good.
I want to say something real quick because Pastor Jay, I saw you wrote in the Capitol Gazette last couple of days. I think it was the 24th that it came out, and there was a part there that I thought was interesting. And it kind of goes to your point, Reverend Gayle, because as we're inviting police officers, or as we start this conversation, what Pastor Jay is noticing is that the police are looking to do something. This is a clip from what you said. You said, the message I believe police officers, executives, and their families are sending is, we know who the enemy is. We know how to stand up in solidarity against a common enemy. The enemy is not just rogue police officers who approach their oath scornfully. The enemy is also the one providing aid and comfort from the perspective of a blind protectionist. If it is truly patriotic to support the police, it is equally so to support the safety and security of our communities, all of them. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, Pastor Jay, you think that the police, there are some groups that would be rogue in a good way to make a change?
Oh, most definitely. You know, there are some issues that we're working on in our county, but United Black Clergy, the NAACP, and Caucus of African American Leaders have been out and about bringing attention to the things that need to be done. And then there's other clergy that are working, for example, during the day, I'm in schools, usually in high school, and I have another pastor that's in a high school mentoring youth. Well, both of us have an extremely good relationship with law enforcement, and so we find ourselves constantly in position to connect with them in a positive way. And we begin to know them. And the reason I wrote what I wrote was because I'm hearing where African-American officers, you know, are going home to Thanksgiving dinner or whatever, and they've got to hear people railing on cops. And it's like, hello, I'm a cop. Mm-hmm. And so at some point in time, we need to understand, like I said, who the real enemy is and unite against that enemy. And I think that they are ready to go rogue. They have been given permission. And here in Maryland, they have been given permission in the law with the latest reform. Because what better way to say I had an obligation to come forward, I had an obligation to speak, than to say, well, I could be criminally held liable if I don't speak up. Mm-hmm. So if you're hanging with me and you worrying about me snitching on you or go Serpico or whatever, then you need to make sure that you watch your conduct. Because if you go and do something crazy, I'm not going to jump with you. I'm not going to. So I think that there are officers that are willing to go, and I wouldn't call them rogue, to be honest. I don't know, Gayle, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I wouldn't call them rogue. I would call those true police officers. Mm-hmm. The ones that
they're the guardians. They're the guardians, like Matt said.
Yeah,
they're the guardians.
Mm-hmm. Man, this has been such an amazing conversation, and I'm sure just the beginning of many. And we could talk with you guys, for a very long time, but we've got to close. And so I want to give everyone just an opportunity to kind of give their final word. If there was, one thing, in the first season of the show last year, I would always ask every guest at the end of the show, what is the hope in the headline? We would always talk about, a particular headline in the news and, what is the hope in spite of this? And that's kind of what I want to ask you guys. What is the hope in the midst of this headline? What is the final word to churches or ministers or communities or leaders for us to really kind of get engaged and make change along these lines? And I will start with you, Pastor Reverend Braddock.
As you're talking, asking this question, the word that keeps coming, or words that keep coming into my mind are radical love. I think God and God's core and God's essence is a God of radical self-giving love. I find my hope in that we as people in humanities and in the structures that we build can support that kind of radical self-giving love instead of doing things that rob people from that. So that's where I put my hope.
That's great. Pastor Hayes?
Yeah, I think the hope in the headline for me is that there is a growing coalition of people who understand the need for change and who are unwilling to continue down this road that has been both ineffective, but more importantly, it's been destructive for communities of color. And frankly, I think that there is enough data to prove that this is not just a Black and brown issue, but this is an American issue, that white people particularly are also getting killed by police officers, and there is a great need for change.
Pastor Jay?
At Harvest, our tagline to tell people what we're about is that we touch hearts with the love of Christ. And that's where I think that we as the faith community can come forward and just make sure that we are touching people's hearts with the love of Christ, being an example, being involved, being engaged, and take a note from Zoom meeting etiquette, be present. And as long as we are present and we all realize that we have a vested interest, all of us have a vested interest. I think once that realization manifests fully, it's going to be amazing to see what we as an entire community, an entire collective can do to bring life back to our communities and relieve us of the pain that has been caused by this great question that we must now address.
Reverend Gayle?
Proximity. Jesus was always in contact with people who were on the margins, the outcasts. Unfortunately, police officers are the outcasts. And so I'm going to put it back on you and Carmela to somehow in your broadcast begin asking ministers to reach out to the police officers and start having these conversations in those small groups so that later on we can bring them together so that they are part of this decision-making process to change policing in America.
Man, this has been great. If there is anything that, and I know both Reverend Gayle and Reverend Braddock, you guys have books. If there's, where can you tell people to get those books? Pastor Jay, Pastor Hayes, if you guys have materials or social media handles, anything that you guys want to share with our audience, I want to give you guys the time to do that very quickly.
Well, you can just follow me at Garrison Hayes on most platforms. If you search my name, you'll follow me. You can find me, but you can particularly look for me on TikTok at Garrison Hayes.
We are on Facebook, Instagram. I refuse to go on TikTok, but
me too, Pastor Jay.
at Harvest Alive. At Harvest Alive. That's the key word. Anywhere you want to find me on the internet, at Harvest Alive. Even our website is harvestalive.com. And you can find out whatever you want to find out about us, but we're very active on Facebook. And we also have a YouTube channel, which I couldn't call Harvest Alive, but if you look up Harvest Crusade Ministries in Glen Burnie, you'll find us.
And I'm old, so Facebook and YouTube is about it. I can't handle anymore. And my book, Preaching Black Lives Matters, from Church Publishing, and also you can find it at Amazon.
And my book, The Space Between Spiritual Activism and an Age of Fear, is available on Amazon, hard copy, Kindle copies, and you can follow me on social media. Look for Matt Braddock. I'm on Instagram at Matty B Preaches. You can follow Christ Congregational Church. If you follow me on social media, though, it's just pictures of my kids and pictures of my hair. So
And
at your own risk.
We should say that. It does. It does.
Great hair.
Yes, great hair.
Great hair. Man, thank you all so much for your time. I've been looking at the comments. Everyone has been saying, rich conversation. We had people joining in, watching live from South Africa, Just such rich content. So thank you all so much for that. As always, guys, make sure that you are following Message Magazine on social media. Make sure that you like the Facebook page. That way you can be notified every single time we go live. So make sure that you click like right here on the Facebook page. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Message1898, Message1898. And it's on our website that you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, as well as our bi-monthly magazine. And we're just so excited because this year we launched our digital magazine. So you can subscribe to both our print issue, and you can get the print issue on your iPad, on whatever you like to read, whatever device you prefer. You can engage with content from Message Magazine. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to our bi-monthly magazine on digital or in print, and make sure you're following us on social media. We've got an amazing issue coming out this May, June that you do not want to miss. Carmela showed me the cover. Listen here. Listen here. Okay. Jamar Tisby is the cover of the Message issue. We've got a core, I guess I can't say core. I don't even know what I'm talking about, but he has a feature article in the magazine that you absolutely want to read, that you definitely want to check out. So make sure that you are subscribed to Message Magazine so that you can get your copy coming out in the next few weeks. All right. So this is what we do. We have these conversations every week, every Thursday at 11 a.m. We will be here next week live, same time, same place, just a different conversation. All right. Until next time. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
And you guys are clear.
Thanks so much, James. Man, thank you all. This was such a rich conversation. I pray you all enjoyed it, had a good time.
I'm serious. I'll be waiting to figure out how y'all gonna do your magic.
I've been sitting here watching it, and it's absolutely incredible how they're doing what they're doing. It's like I was feeling good about what the church figured out how to do, and I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, we got to step it up again.
That's how James and Robert in the background that make everything go smoothly, and Claudia's pushing it out there so people know what we're doing. So it's amazing. I tell everybody when they come on, sometimes we like to convert some of the material, which I think would be good, to take this podcast and put this in the magazine. And so if that's the case, I might have to follow up, to get a few more details. I thought it would be great, for instance,